Hemshech Ayin Beis, Volume 1, Chapter 63, page 117. We're in the middle of the 16th Discourse. As the Friedrich Rebbe says, the summary of the beginning of this discourse, he says, makifim klolim uprotim. We've been discussing, after the long discussion about immanent energy, the Rebbe Rashab moved to transcendent energy, or makif, sevev, and explained it with the distinction between desire and faculties, ratzon and faculties. That's how it plays itself out in the human structure, which also reflects the divine structure of ratzon elyon, which is keser, makif, and the keches and the eris premium, which is the energy within containers, is like the faculties. And then went to the point of difference between and shefa. And sof. Why it's called because it reflects its source, and shefa is concerned with the recipient, how the recipient receives it, the way he receives it, and so on. As such, he moved now on to understanding makif and its impact on our lives. Because though it's beyond us, it's transcendence, in the last chapters, particularly chapter 58, after explaining how beyond it is, Rabbi Rashab is now bringing it back to us, meaning that this transcendence has an impact and is related to us. So though it's not a revealed impact, it's not a conscious impact, but let's put it this way, think of it like this. After establishing that it's an unconscious state, he's now explaining how the unconscious impacts the conscious existence, to sum it up. So in 58 he spoke about all the different, how Sevav is everywhere, how it affects creation and how it determines Giluyim and so on, basically like Ratzon. What would we human beings be like if we had no desire? We'd a full functioning body, but would have no interest to move. Yeah. What happens if we had desire and we didn't have the faculties? We'd have everything we want to do, but we'd be like trapped. So the faculties are essentially the instruments. Think of it like the ship, and that's the captain of the ship. But the captain in this case is unconscious, meaning you can't detect it in a direct way, but it impacts. So now we've been moving, then he moved in chapter 59, it's distinguishing that there are different types of levels of transcendence, which only shows us why are there levels of transcendence, why not just beyond, and that's it. Because it's shaykh lapnimi. Because the transcendence has a relationship with the faculties. However, it's what we call a detached relationship, an undetectable one. And then established that there's generally, in every world there's a makif, keser of asiyah, beriyah. Think of it like the desire within the art itself. Think of the art now as being a big, let's take the art to make it a big structure. I was using the example of art, but let's make the art now into a very big, it's not just a small piece of art. It has all kinds of dimensions in it. Or let's say a building. The building has the general desire, I want a building, I want a home. But then there's a ratzon for each room. There's a ratzon in the kitchen, there's a ratzon for the bedroom, there's a ratzon for the living room, there's a ratzon for every section. Because if you don't have that, it won't come to being. So bottom line is, there's one general makif that encompasses it all, and then there's the encompasser. That's why he said that if you recall, is ratzon sheber ratzon, raivid the kol raivid. When we say the Suda Shlishis, what means raivid the kol raivid? The ratzon of all ratzonos. So Tzemach Tzedek asked him, the Rebbe Rashab cites it, because it's the desire behind all desires. Okay, and he established that there's two levels of this desire behind all desires. There's two levels of the makif kloli. One we call tehiru, one tehiru tata. Tehiru is the makif before the tzimtzum, which at that point before the tzimtzum, you can't call it makif yet, so you all call it as encompasses it all. It's the way God envisions the existence, the whole structure, but it's still in the God's mind, so to speak. Then comes the tzimtzum, and the tzimtzum actually creates space for independent realities. But here too there's a ratzon kloli, which is essentially a reflection of the ratzon kloli that was there before. But now it's post tzimtzum. Now if you think of it like this, think of it like the engineer, the architect envisions the building, but he's on his own doing so. Then he brings a group of contractors and so on and says, here's my vision. That's Ak. Ak is now articulating the vision on terms where it can be implemented. So it's after the Tzimtzum. Now it's called beriyah de klolos. Now we're talking beriyah. It's already a beriyah now. It's the beginning of a creation. So Bereshis bara Elokim has two steps in a way. You could have Bereshis bara Elokim, how God envisions existence, and then there's Bereshis bara Elokim, God actually creating. And Bereshis nam maimerhu. Bereshis is also one of the utterances, but as Rashi says, everything was created in a nucleus, like a seed, and then each day it emerged. So Ak is that seed. The Ratzon kloli before the Tzimtzum wouldn't even be a seed; would be the imagination of the seed, the envisioning, the shir atzmei, however you explain it. So now you moved on. So what's the impact of these two makifim? Remember, there's still makifim in each world, but we're addressing that. Now, what's the difference between these two? So he started with Ak, and in chapter 60 and 61, basically it defined three impacts that Ak has on us. One is the bittul, klolos elmis, the way he puts it, v'chol kema, l'fanecha tishtachave, that the whole kema means the whole structure of existence before you bows, prostrates itself. That's Ak. So Ak, because it's so close, that seed is obviously completely bottled to its. If you were able to enter the consciousness of Ak, it knows exactly why it's here. It's never disconnected. It's completely connected to the divine source. It's after the Tzimtzum, so it's a so-called independent reality. Before the Tzimtzum, you can't even call it disconnect. Everything is connected. But Ak is completely aware of its, because it's the blueprint of all of existence. Ak later will be called Torah. You say staka bar raisa bar alma. That level of a raisa that God looks into is Ak. Is the blueprint that He will look into. Obviously, Torah is rooted before the Tzimtzum and an atzilus, but there again, it's not yet what we would call a defined Torah. Then it's just part of God's will and wisdom. So here you have a blueprint that God says, "I will look into it." What do you mean? How is God looking? He's looking into Himself. Yes, He's looking to Himself how He defined what He wants in a blueprint that we should be able to retrace the steps. That will be discussed later. So now he says there are three impacts. So the first thing is that this Ak has a natural bittul, and because it's the whole kema, because it's the blueprint, that bittul is also impacting all of existence, except we're not aware of it, which is why we have free will. But at the end of the chapter, he makes it clear, it's still something seeps in. Because that blueprint has the bittul, because Ak has the bittul, we all have at least the minimal bittul, even a klippa, to receive chayas, to receive,
essential for survival.
Yeah, the essential. Yeah, you could say that. Like basically what do they say? Like when a person, God forbid, a coma, they say, but the essential, what do they call? The vital organs are functioning. The vital sign. So there's a vital sign. The vital sign that there's some keli for chayas, for life. So even the biggest atheist is getting life from God. That means there's some bittul in his consciousness. Whether he acknowledges or not, or so on, is not relevant here. Then goes net level 2, in chapter 61. He speaks about from Lamnatzeach, from the Likutei Teres Hazriya, that the bittul is that the bittul in the Shamas Yisrael, which is more pnimizdik, pnimi. I'm sorry, rather not. I have to correct that. It's not pnimi. Nevertheless, you have to say. He speaks about Mesiras Nefesh, the love, the hidden love that is there in every soul. It's also concealed, but it expresses itself in times of challenge with Mesiras Nefesh. That comes also from Ak. So it's the faith, Amunah Pshuta, which is more than just the vital sign of life. Here you're talking already an Amunah Pshuta. And then he goes on and says, and you could also say it's the Nasiv and Nishma, the bittul to the Baal HaRatzon. And I'm just summing up things we've learned already. Bittul to the Baal HaRatzon. Okay. Which is there fundamentally in each person, not just the bittul to a particular desire of God's, but to the Baal HaRatzon. Clearly, it's a little more than the Amunah that he mentions, because he's like adding to it. It's a total bittul to what the master desires, and the pleasure and simcha that you get from that desire, the God's desire being fulfilled, and that God has pleasure from it. And the bittul part is because means that even if it's not comfortable for you, even if it's something that goes against your will, you submit to it. Fine. Then in chapter 62, the last chapter we learned, he now moves on. Okay, so what about makif kloli of tehiru? Now here we're talking, first he establishes here, we're talking, everything is makif. So makif has a paradox. It's beyond, but it has a relationship. Like he says, makif, but now we talk about tehiru, which is the eagle hagadol that remained after the tzimtzum. So not, it's before the tzimtzum, but it's remained after the tzimtzum and it surrounds all of existence. It has no shaykhs to elements altogether. And you don't even have the reflection that is revealed. So here, at least Ak has the minimal, whether it's the life force, whether it's the bittul for the life force, whether it's the amuna, whether it's not the bittul nasav and nishma. What's the impact of something that's so beyond us? But you have to say it has an impact. And the answer to this is the effect it has on the containers. Because the containers are rooted here. So containers are completely concealed. But it has an impact, and what he says now is, as opposed to the impact of Ak on Neshamas Yisrael, which is Mesiras HaNefesh, where you're giving your soul to God, here we're talking about giving your body. So the avoid of this is that when a person, like the Akedah, when a person literally physically gives their body, either in a physical way, Mesiras Nefesh, of your body, not just of your soul and desire, that you're completely committed. The Akedah was an example. That's where the ayil, which replaced Yitzchak, the ram, it says Poshet Yodeh. It extended itself and it reached into what the talis of Avram Avinu. So he says the talis of Avram Avinu is the eagle hagadol, because Avram is the kav and the talis is the makif. And another example is Yom Kippur, or fasting. That's not just dedicating your soul. Like you could say Yom Kippur, you know what? You could eat and everything, but you daven all day, and then you go for a meal. And the main focus of Yom Kippur is that. No, Yom Kippur is more than that. Yom Kippur is you actually take your body, you give of your fat and of your blood to God, like a korban. That is the bittul of the kelim. And that bittul of the kelim reaches deeper than the bittul of the air. The bittul of the air reaches Ak, and it comes from Ak, as we said. When a person has amunah is a level of air. It may be minimal air, it may not yet be integrated. Remember, we're not talking about integrated energy here. Everything here is makif. Amunah is also makif, but it's revealed. It has some expression. Here, there's no expression. But the fact that a person gives of himself, that where is it coming from? Why does he have that power? That power comes from tehiru, the higher makif. So obviously, you could ask the question. 1 second. When a person, when Avram brought Yitzchak to that cave, why is that different than someone who shows you has amunah and faith? You could also say it's a revelation. He doesn't exactly answer it, but I would say is because it's the body, and the body itself, it's almost like the neshama is telling the body to do it, because obviously the body itself is not going to do anything. It's the neshama of Avram. When a person fasts Yom Kippur, if it was just an inanimate body, it wouldn't be fasting. So clearly the neshama is informing, but the fact is that the body goes along with it, and that the neshama reaches into the body to do that. The power of that comes from tehiru. Let's put it this way: if there was no tehiru, we'd only be able to give our souls. We wouldn't be able to give our bodies. That's the bottom line. That's what appears what he's saying here. So it's completely concealed. There was only tehiru tata. Let's say tehiru didn't have an impact on us. So basically, our avodah would be primarily ruchnisdik, would be spiritual dedication. But to actually take a physical container, physical body, and be able to offer that through fasting, you'd say no, you can't. It's not possible. Either the body wouldn't go along, or if you did it, it wouldn't reach where it had to reach. Anyway, I don't know if he's going to explain this more, but I'm trying to just distinguish, because clearly we have to make a difference. It's not just two levels, because he stated out clearly that if you look in the beginning of chapter 62, he says, Al kain nimshach misham eza ha'ara begili b'neshamis, because it has some relationship. That's Ak, because Ak is already within existence. Fine. It's the seed, it's the blueprint, but it has some. הגם שזה גם כן בחינס makif לאלמס, אחר הצמצום, אין לזה שייכות אל האלמס. ואין נמשך מזה האורה בגילי. Has no relationship, and from there's no revealed reflection. And then he goes on to say, but it does have an impact. So what really is the difference? You have to say the difference is one is a revealed impact and one is not revealed. Why is it not revealed? Because containers fundamentally are not a revelation. So the fact that we give our bodies doesn't make it a revelation. In other words, it's actually a surprise. It makes much more sense, if you think about it, for a person, my soul connects to God. So all year round, let's say I'm busy and distracted, but then there's times I focus, and my soul feels it wants to be one with its source. But a body is an inanimate, what is a body? So you could make a big argument philosophically, why are you bringing bodies into this? Like I said, Bedakus, like suddenly, like the Rambam says. Ultimate reward? Yeah, we have to give the body some reward because it participated and was there, so we give it something. But after Tchis HaMesim comes the ultimate, the future, forever and ever. Neshama is Nenim, is Ivashchina. Who else can relate to godliness if it's not a soul? So this chapter has a lot more depth to it. It's really about the yesh. So who asked me after the class yesterday, so what will the body look like when Mashiach comes? When you say, Neshama nezenus min hazunas min haguf. Oh, you asked me this. So Neshama will be fed by the body. So one second, so what is this, a play of words? So the body will become like the soul? No. A body is a yesh. The yesh today feels it's self-contained and self-made. When Mashiach comes, this yesh is going to feel the yesh amiti. The essence of atzmus. Atzmus is beyond revelation. So is the body. So the soul is a revealing force. The body is an essential force. Because it's concealed, it can go off track and do its own agenda. But if you want to get to the source and essence of what the body is an essential force, like he says in Agedas HaKedesh. Who can create something that feels it has no source? Only one who has no source. So the body is that. So in a strange way, the body is both our worst enemy and Atzmus itself. Because of no revelation, the body can do, as we know, bodily desires are the worst of all. You know? A neshama's desire, the worst it can be, is that it wants Avos Hashem for its own selfish purposes. On the other hand, the body, precisely because it is so devoid of revelation, means it's etzem itself. Now here in this chapter, he wasn't talking about atzmus in the body, he's talking more the makif, lifnei hatzimtzum. But for all practical purposes,
it's very powerful.
Yeah.
It's devoid of revelation, therefore it's atzmus itself. That's very, very powerful.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a chiddush in Alter Rebbe, one of maybe the biggest chiddushim. You know when he said it? Agedas HaKedesh Simcha Chof was written days before he passed away.
You just said it. It's devoid of revelation. Since the body is devoid of any revelation, it's atzmus itself.
Yeah. Because atzmus is. If you remember, we had a Pedic. He spoke. You remember a Pedic where he spoke about how guf. There's two things. There's also the mitzvahs built to mitzvahs nimtza. I refer you to end of chapter Mem Tes, where he alludes to this. Yeah. Actually, it's not just alludes; it's very relevant. So, in general, when you speak in Chassidus says, like we learned a little earlier, that mamale, an energy that gives life, an energy that energizes something, cannot create the thing. That's the rule, because it's like electricity does not create a light bulb, because they're commensurate to each other. A light bulb has to be created by another entity. I'm just using a human example. But the same thing is above. Mamala kalaman, because it manifests like Yehi Rakia, can't be the force that created actually the Rakia, because it's the force that gives it life. That's like the neshama doesn't create the body. The body does not come from your soul. The body comes from the seed, fertilized egg, and like the Gemara says, the bones come from the father, the blood from this, the whole thing. The basu gidim and samas. The soul comes from God, from a higher source. But look at this. The interesting thing is they work hand in hand. The body is development. The body's emergence even would not happen if there was no soul. In other words, if an egg was fertilized by a seed, and for whatever reason, God forbid, God did not want to attach a soul there, it won't conceive. It'll just be like a seed that was fertilized, and that was it. And then it will die. Yeah. But let me just finish my sentence. So can you hold your thought? Yeah. On the other hand, if you have only a soul and you don't have the seed, obviously nothing happens. So you need the partnership. Now, but the way it works, and this is very relevant because God wanted, remember we said we talk about interface, is that interesting, it's not that body develops on its own and the soul on its own, and then at some point, okay, boom, they're brought together. From the second of conception, the soul is actually the force that activates all the physiological changes that will make the fetus grow into a child.
In the womb, it could be the mother soul that's doing that.
Okay, but the thing has already life. You probably can't disconnect it then. But at some point you could.
I don't know if it's independent life of its mother. As soon as an emergency, it gets its own life, no?
No, because it's a new entity, that's for sure, because what's the mother like? Before that, she didn't have that. There's a new entity that's now being given life. I mean, let's put it this way, even in the first day, you can't see it, it's so minute, but you're already having a flow.
Right.
Obviously,
it's not using the nefesh.
That's a question the Gemara asks when the nefesh enters.
Right.
But there has to be some life force that's entering there. Don't call it a nefesh. Forget the name. Something is causing this seed to become the next day this. That's. I'm not getting out halachically whether it's independent or not. The point I'm trying to say is it's not. The point is that it's growing. Whatever life force, the life force is. It's not just a seed that's growing on its own. The neshama itself that did not create it is the one that gives it life, and later will be the one that energizes it. But then upon death, what happens? The soul goes back, and the body is still intact. So the Rebbe brings in Chelik Vav. So why does the body deteriorate? Because the body did have relation. Because even kelim comes from eris. Esavas er nasa keli. Because even the kelim also are shaped from the air. That's the way they didn't want it to be an independent. But if you think of it, if you really dissect it, the body comes from one shayrish, one root, and the eris from another place. And then they just work very close together, because remember, the er habligvul and the er hagvul are ultimately one. So remember we said earlier that even immanent energy comes through transcendent energy. It's the infinite gvul of God's envisioning that envisioned also the gvul of existence, including the kelim of existence. So ultimately it's all connected there. But once it comes down into a world of diversity, these are two paths. There's the body work and there's the soul work. So we have two different types of avodah. We said, Evdi Hashem ben nishmosam, Evdi Hashem begufam. He brought Chaneichen Eliyahu. So in other places, in Samach Vov and other places, even Ayin Beis, Chaneichen Eliyahu, their main avodah was body work, so to speak. Their avodah was bir haguf, and that's why they both did not physically die. Their bodies went up Sarah Shamayim, Chaneichen Eliyahu. Moshe Rabbeinu is an example of a Shama of Ma. This is the difference in the Shamas of Ma and the Shamas of Ban. In our personal Aveda, let's say, of davening, learning, you could say, is Aveda of Neshama. The Aveda of a fasting, of bringing a carbon, that's Aveda of Guf. So obviously there's also a soul involved when you're fasting, as I said before. Actually, it's called Hey Inuyim, the Nuya HaNefesh.
Yeah, because it affects the soul.
Right, of course. But it is also permeating. It's not just a meditative or spiritual exercise. You're actually doing something physical. So he's saying here in this chapter, this is the explanation, is that it's not a revealed element because it's in the body. The body has no revelation. Any revelation is soul-like. But it is something that is being affecting the body. The question I have is, if without tehiru, would it not be possible to do this in the body? Or would the body not reach that level? I would say even not possible. Just like without Ak, the Amunah wouldn't be there in any revealed way. Let's take away Ak from the picture, and there's a jump from Lifnei Tzimtzum straight to our world. So the jump is so big, everything would be concealed. We wouldn't even have this. The kudus of Amunah would be completely unconscious. It would be there, but it would be unconscious. So here, you could also say here, on the contrary, here, if you didn't have tehiru, you could say this bittul wouldn't exist. Yeah, that's what I would say. Okay.
What insight can you provide when I'm struggling with the fact that we're saying that the body comes from tehiru and the keser, the body, and the neshama comes from Ak. So now it's apparently counterintuitive. Because you would think that the neshama is a higher thing. If you ask somebody, the soul is higher than the body. You would think spirituality is higher than physicality. So we would think that spirituality would be sourced in the higher world rather than the kelim, which is a lower.
You got it.
And to strengthen the question, we say you just quoted the Gemara that says the body, the contribution to the three partners, the husband, the wife, and the God, in the creation of a child. And the Gemara says that the contribution of the parents is the body, the bones, and the soul, the kelim. And the neshama is coming from God, which would seem to be
good.
Again,
very good questions. Very good questions, and I'll answer them briefly. Chassidus talks about this directly. It's not even my chiddush here. I'll just refer you an interesting sikha from the Rebbe in Chelik Tazayin, the sikha on Truma and Vayakal Pekudei. It's a siyum achigiga. Yeah, where the end is there, where even Peish Yisrael Malay mitzvahs karimah, that even sinners are filled with mitzvahs like a pomegranate. So he speaks
which parsha?
Truma and Vayakal Pekudei, or maybe Pekudei alone, if I recall. They're two complementary sikhs. But briefly, your question is an excellent question, and it's true intuitively. That's what we would say. But here's where the chiddush of Chassidus is. Yeah. I go back to the Rambam and the Ramban just to simplify it somewhat. It's true that that's exactly what the Rambam said. That the logical is, who can relate this to God? The soul. Soul appreciates God. It comes from a spiritual place. It's a spiritual entity. It can learn Torah. Menim is ivashchina. Right? So, what's Chis HaMesim? The Rambam says it's a temporary reward because the body also participated. So you have to somewhat give throw them a candy, so to speak. But then after Chis HaMesim will come the final stage, back to Ruchnis. The Rambam went the rational approach. Even though they say the Rambam didn't learn Kabbalah, but it's definitely not Kabbalah. Chassidus really changes the picture. And I will even say that even within Judaism today, I could show you these two philosophies still dominate, even though people are not even aware of it. Like when you ask most people who never learn Chassidus, what's the purpose of this world? They'll say it's a pruzder. It's a corridor to reach Olam Haba. You ask a chassid, they'll say Dira B'Tachtena. Very different answer. Right? So one is the Olam Haba Ruchnis, and one is Dira B'Tachtena. Mashiach. It's about spiritual reward or about this world being refined and transformed. So right there you got. So intuitive. So someone will argue, what do you mean? How could you say that? That's why I brought yesterday. But yet it says Yofa Shah Achaz B'Tshuva Ma'asim Tovim Ba'Elam Haz Makol Chai Elam Haba. What does the Rambam do with that? So the Rambam says yes, because the struggle and work here has such value. That's why you have Chis HaMesim. But after that, Elam Haba becomes the dominant reigning force. So his take on the Mishnah would be a little different than we would say. The Ramban and Chassidus and the Alter Rebbe Paskins, someone says, the Rabbeinu HaGadol Posak HaRamban. He Paskins like the Ramban. And not just the Alter Rebbe, it means also the Magid, the Baal Shem Tov, and the Arizal. Their approach is no. Chis HaMesim is the ultimate future. But it's counterintuitive. How could the body ever? So here is where, before the Alter Rebbe, I'm not really sure how the Mukabalim understood it, but the Alter Rebbe's Chiddush that I mentioned, the Geser Kedesh, answers it. Because if you didn't have Atzmus in the picture, you're right. If our relationship with God only goes to God's revelations, then of course, revelation, the soul is dominant. But since God wants a relationship with Him Himself, and He's beyond revelation, which part of existence reveals more the essence of God? Not revelation. Revelation reveals that God is a luminary. But if you want to know what God's personality is like, that He's Mitziyus Atzmusei, that nothing created Him, that He is an existence that's non-existential, that He's a Yesh Amiti, that Ein Lo Siba V'Ila Acheres, and has no cause. Neshamas can't reveal that, because Neshama relates to a cause. Neshamas always are aware that there's a source. So who can reveal that? Only this Elam Haz Agashmi, that doesn't think it has a source, and the body that doesn't feel it has a source. That reveals, the Alter Rebbe says, Atzmus itself. To put it a little more, in other words, I would say the following. I said, the power to conceal is higher than the power to reveal. You look at a wise person. Let's say there's an argument at the table. Siyog l'chach mishtika. For a wise person to be quiet, it takes a lot more energy than for him to speak, because he has what to say. Right. So he has to withhold. So to withhold something you have to give takes more effort. What does it mean spiritually in above? It's like this. The tzimtzum, the power to create a tzimtzum and conceal comes from a deeper place than the power to reveal. Because revelation is just a reflection of your being. Here, you're like withholding and concealing yourself. That power comes from a deeper place. Klolim relate to that, and is revelation. So yes, if you talk on the level of revelation, neshama is a higher level. But if you talk about atzmis, like I said yesterday, when the person davens and he suspends his wisdom and remember the two people that feel ani? So if you talk about you want to know God's majesty, you go to the scholars and you go to the literate people. You want to know God's essence, you go to the illiterate. Because they don't have any revelations getting in the way. Little children, a young child, like he says in the tehiru, they say Shem Shemaim Shagabu Fikel. That means for them it's simple. They say God. They don't have sophistication. They don't know about spheres. They don't know about tzimtzum. They don't know about kav. They don't know about ak. What is God? The etzem. That's all they know, because they don't have seichel that hijacks them, so to speak. That seduces them. So now, but the kavanah, one second, the kavanah is that these two should come together. We're not talking about rejecting the neshama and just going to the body. We're talking about they both should inform each other. You want the etzem begili. That's the expression. So the Rebbe says, Dir b'tachtenim, in Tanya. He says in Perek Lamed Vav, he says, the higher worlds can't be the purposes in the higher worlds because they're all a yeridim epnei hanav yizbarach. Atzilus. What's the point of creating atzilus? Atzilus can never be as powerful as ak, and ak can never be as powerful as eir yisaf lifnei atzimtzum. Because the higher you go, so why would God descend? So he asks that. So he says the only answer is tachtenim, because that the only place where something is achieved, that's not just a revelation, is a world where there's no revelation. Tachtenim, and precisely because there's no revelation, that's the purpose, to transform a place like that. But the goal is not to stay in the yesh. The goal is to teach the yesh about that. The neshama should teach the yesh that it is really sourced in atzmus, and together they should join together, and that's the ultimate reward. And when Mashiach comes, will be neshama and guf. But the neshama will appreciate and learn from the body even more than the body learns from the soul, because it will learn about what atzmus is like.
But then, how do you deal with the apparent contradiction?
Okay, so.
Okay,
now the Gemara. Let's go to the Gemara. The Gemara, I would say very simple. There he's talking about the neshama as it's in a revelation force. The parents are given the power to bring koyach atzmus into this world, the body. And we say neshama there, you mean, and God gives neshama, you're not talking about atzmus there, you're talking about the revelations of godliness. That's how I would interpret the Gemara.
That the body is a contribution of the parents,
but
the body doesn't have any source.
No, the body is a contribution of the I'm talking about the physical, right. But the parents are the ones that are revealed, that koyach atzmus. That's what I would say. That's why we say that parents have the power to give birth. They create koyach ein sof. Let's put it this way: God on His own, without parents, cannot give birth to a child. Of course, He can create yesh ma'ayin, but the way it's built in the structure, it's two people coming together. If you want to put it even more romantic, look in Chumash. God created man, a human being in the divine image. He separated them and said, "Become one flesh," and that's how you bring life. That's how you bring atzmus into the existence. There, the Gemara, the neshama would be, the neshama is coming from the revealed levels of the divine. That's for sure. It's not talking about atzmus. That atzmus gives the neshama and the body is coming from giluyim. For sure not. It's the other way around. I mean, you asked me how to interpret the Gemara.
Well, so you're saying that basically...
Remember, the soul also, listen, you say chelik elakam mal mamash, you're talking about the soul. Right. Nevertheless, chelik elakam mal mamash is chelik elakah. It's a revealed dimension of godliness. The guf is deeper than chelik elakam mal mamash, if you want to really get to the bottom of it. Because it's atzmus itself.
Even when the Shem drew the mamash atzmus?
Yeah. Look in some sikhs, it's apparent that that's the way it is. That even chelik elakam mamash. Yeah, because at the end of the day, neshama is a revealing force. Again, I'm not talking about the neshama in atzmus. I'm talking about the neshama, what it reveals. If you want to go to the root of the neshama, it's all atzmus that can be split into two. We're talking about what The guf reveals the atzmus of atzmus. The neshama reveals the oir of atzmus, if you want to put it that way. But if you go to atzmus itself, of course the neshama and guf are both rooted there. Oir is also rooted in atzmus. No, it doesn't have another root. There's no second God forbid. But we're talking about what does Eir tell you about Atzmus? It'll only tell you about what's called relatively superficial. Well, it's not that superficial because Eir also reveals this. Look, it gets deeper because Eir reveals the power of the Yesh itself. But at the end of the day, it's the Yesh that is the force. The paradox that's hard to get your hands around is the Yesh aware of this? The answer is not really, because the awareness itself is Gili. The awareness, what I just said, when the Alter Rebbe wrote in the Geras HaKedesh, that's already the Neshama speaking. Is the Alter Rebbe's Neshama telling us about the power of the Guf. Because Guf, that's the whole point there. Guf is power does not need to be aware of. It is what it is. Does Atzmus need revelation? No. And that's not a chsarn. It's not a weakness if God is not revealed. So He's not revealed. Doesn't need it. There's nothing missing. On the other hand, the same thing with the body. The body doesn't need revelation to be atzmus. The problem is we need it. Because if not, the body's just going to do what it does. So the bottom line is revelation and etzem have to come together. That's the end of the day. I'll take it a step further. That's what I brought from Vayigash and Chelik Hey. In atzmus it's negay that it should be revealed. So let's go even further. In atzmus negay. But if you only had Eir and only the higher worlds, the Rambam would be right. That was the way to go. And basically you're not reaching Atzmus, and there are Mukubolim that say this. That the deepest we reach is reflection, Shmoi, Keser, whatever. In Vayelech, in Samach Vav, he talks about those Mukubolim. But there's those that say we reach Atzmus. The question is, how do you reach Atzmus? So the answer is, the Yesh is Atzmus, the Eir reveals it, but ultimately it's really one. It's the revealed Etzem, and the Etzem revealed, it's all one. But for us, we have to go through different steps here. On a lower level is what we just discussed. Samach Aleph and Samach Beis, chapters 61 and 62, are in Avodah these two elements. One is what comes from Ak, and one is what comes from tehiru. But remember, tehiru is not really Atzmus, it's just an example of it on a lower level, but it's the idea. Okay? I mean, this is very fundamental stuff, I understand. It needs a lot of explanation. What I just said to you, it takes...
Quick question and follow-up, or do you want to go inside?
I'd rather go inside. You could discuss it later if you like. So chapter Samach Gimel, page 117. And now these two levels that we spoke about in chapter 60, 61 and 62. Tehiru is Igul HaGadol, with the 10 hidden spheres are for the Tzimtzum. Tehiru Tata is Ak, Adam Kadman, primordial man after the Tzimtzum. Bechinas makifim klolim leilamis. They're both makifim klolim. Remember we spoke about a central, a overriding and encompassing desire. V'yesh gam ki makifim protim. In addition to that, as we said earlier, there are also specific makifim for each particular level. V'hu inyan keser atzilus. That's the inyan of keser, the crown of atzilus. Shezeh b'chinas rotzen lahaitzel atzilus. That's a desire to emanate atzilus. As I said, that's one part of the structure. V'chein keser de beriyah livre elam beriyah. Same thing, keser beriyah, to create the world of beriyah. Ad keser de asiyah, till the last level, last world. He skips Yitzira. He said it earlier too. But the idea is clear. Shehu b'chinas rotzen proti le'elam asiyah. That's a specific desire for elam asiyah. So if the whole structure is like a building, think of this as different floors, or different rooms, or different chambers, however you want to put it. Each one needs its own particular desire, or else it also won't emerge. Now the question is, what is the role of these particular makifim? We know the role of the general makif. He says, the inyan of this is the rotzen poshet, which is tehiru, that simple desire in the infinite light before the tzimtzum, hagam shehu shezeu ma she'ol b'ritzeni yizbarach lahaitzel livrei, even though that this is what arose in his desire to emanate and to create, meaning all of existence, and more specifically, the primordial thought of tehiru tata, of Ak, Adam Kadman, that already has a relationship to the world. So the continuation of the sentence will be after the parentheses. We'll have to read the parentheses. He's explaining a little of the difference. Because this simple desire before the tzimtzum, even though it's the desire for everything that's going to come into being, and he envisions and he measures and evaluates in his own power everything that will come out in the future. Like I said, there's no worlds there at all. By contrast, the primordial thought of Adam Kadmon, there, it came into being, at least this thought. Like I said, the blueprint is there, whatever you want to call it. The thought is there. There's some type of defined thought. Where before that, it's just completely God's imagination, if you want to call it such.
But there was already Bashir Ba'asma.
Yes. Yes. I explained differences. The bottom line is, one is a reality that is part of existence. As I said, it's like you put the, what do they call it? The cornerstone has been laid in Ak. Before that, there's a seed. Before that, there's no seed. Yes, there's a seed in God's mind, but you can't call it. It should stop right there. Nothing is ever going to happen. Remember earlier he said that machshava, when it arises in God's desire, his desire is the power to create. That is the chayis. So he spoke about several levels there. He spoke about a level like in Tanya, Perek Memches, that it actually is the life, but it's makif, so you don't feel it. Then he spoke about a level, remember lifnei that where he has the Yachol Yachol, that even though it naturally would create, he withholds it from creating. The same thing, he withholds it from impacting, his knowledge impacting us. So the interesting thing is, here you have another level. You have Ak. Ak is like that. And then you have how tehiru law doesn't impact either. But the difference would be tehiru law b'chlal is not in the category of existence. You understand what I'm trying to emphasize here? No, there's like three levels here.
The level before the tiny batzak.
Yeah, no, I'm saying right. And that does not impact us because God, kol yachol, like he said, has the ability not to let it impact. But then what about tehiru law? Tehiru law also God knows our existence. And that will ultimately cause the creation to come into being. So that's even more distant because it's completely within the God. It's not even in existence. The chiddush is Ak. That doesn't require kol yachol, lifnei tzimtzum. Because lifnei tzimtzum, it's all in the Godhead. After the tzimtzum, and you have a seed. And remember, by God, ein kayach hasapel, the seed means actual. And that should not allow, and that should not turn into creation, and that should not turn into affecting us. That is a chiddush. That's what he said. Chapter 60. I'm just trying to think.
It's not determine the outcome of our free will.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I need a little more eon in this, because what does that mean? Ak is already a creation. So what does it mean in chapter 60? Ak is a creation, and yet it doesn't impact. How could you say that in Ak? No, I'm talking about not the Yediyah part, the Hasavas part. So what are we saying? That
It talks about the assumption part.
huh?
You can say that about any dot on the painting, any color, which is staying what it is.
No, you're right. So at what point so when he says in Tanya Perek Memches that Yediyah zu hi chayes v'savusim ayin liyesh, that the idea of makif is the chayes of existence, Tanya Perek Memches. So What is that level? What level is that? I'm just trying to figure out where you understand that. It says in Tanya that Seviv doesn't mean outside. Seviv is b'teichen primishin adrabe. It's Sehu HaChayis. Ratzon Elyon is the Chayis, because immediately, as soon as he arises in his will, it creates. That's clearly in Tanya. The Rebbe Rashab is saying there's a level that's higher than that. Kedem she, he says that, and then there's another level. So which is which level? That's what I'm trying to just identify. What's what? Needs a little iyun here. I'm not talking about Yediyah B'chira. I understand the Yediyah B'chira part. Yediyah B'chira means that even though it creates and everything, so-called Kol Yachol doesn't let it impact, because makif and so on. But what about the force that creates life? So Mamala Kalaman, I understand. Mamala Kalaman is so-called committed to giving life. That's why Kosher Kukris, Mamala Kalaman is within. Mamala Kalaman doesn't have the Kol Yachol element. Mamala is giving life, and it's sensed in existence, and that's that. Seviv is the Ratzon. The Ratzon right away creates, is the real force of creating, but it's concealed. But then he says there's a level that it arises in the will and it doesn't create. And it's mashman, he's talking about ak. So what, ak has two levels? Ak is already a seed, it's already Bereishis Bara Lakim, it's already something is there. Okay. It could be that's it, yeah. I'm thinking out loud here. Okay, anyway, let's continue here. So he made a distinction here between the two levels. One is there's no elements mitzias klal, mashenk machshav. At least there's nesav machshavazu. Now he's going back to before the parentheses. So let's go just the hinei rotzen. He's going back. Hinei rotzen aposhet of itself hagam shezal mashal b'tzeini. I'm just giving the context here. Even though it's what arose in the desire to create all the details, and especially the primordial thought of ak of tiratata, which has a connection to the worlds. Nevertheless, in this thought, everything is still concealed. And it's all encompassed completely, to the point that they all stand equal together. As it's known that an ak, atzilus and asiyah are exactly equal. I mean, all this is coming to say why you need a rotzen and a makif for each world. Because if you're only going to rely on the rotzen kloli, let's say I want a building, you're only going to have an equal. Everything's going to be equal. You want to have you want to have a desire for each particular room or each particular floor, each sanctum, each
differentiation.
Right, but not through the primi, the rotzen. So this is the case he's making. This is the case he's making. One second. Okay, so that's what he's saying. And he says, and you see it like this. He says, for two reasons. This is for two reasons. Ak is an equalizer. Because two reasons. The first is you can say because the way all the worlds stand in Ak and the seed, like the energy and the revelation there is equal. Even though afterwards, when they emerge, in their actual emergence, there's a great distance between asiyah and atzilus. What?
It's like the toenail and the mind from the same seed.
Yeah. One second. The batzilus melu b'shein sof shemer begili b'kelim datzilus. Because Natzila is the manifestation, the clothing of the divine energy. It revealed there in the containers. It says v'iyu v'gamuyachad, and he and his containers are one. Here he's interpreting gamuya as containers. Ubiyahim nefradim, and in biyah they're separate, the containers from the energy. Makom mokum kamashem ba'ak, nevertheless the way they are in ak yashlem she'er behem b'shavim. You can say that the air there is equal. The kashem she'achash nesava had a machshava gduma da'ak. Just as like after they're created, the primordial thought of Adam Kadman surrounds and encompasses them all equally. As I mentioned, that the circles of Ak go all the way down to asiyah. Remember, the circle encircles all of existence. So if existence is like a human structure, atzilus, beriyah, asiyah, think of it like the head, the torso, and the legs, but the makif, the circle around the body, is equalized from the head all the way through the legs. So it goes. That's what he says. So that's even after they're created. Emphasis on kodim. The same thing, the way they're encompassed in the thought before they emerge. In other words, when they're still in the seed. After they emerge, there's also the equalizer. But the same thing as that they're inside the primordial thought. They're all equal in the erva gili. In other words, the same amount of air in the thought that is investing in atzilus is invested in asiyah.
But he's saying this as a given already.
Yeah. Why? Because in Eitz Chaim he says that. That's what it says befedish. The chiddush here is saying it's also in.
We know that he's like a given.
No, because that's what it says in Eitz Chaim. Because he's the gulim the atzilus is not the Alter Rebbe's lashon. That's from the Rebbe Rashab's lashon. That, but he says, you see the lashon. Yeah, it's a given because those that know Kabbalah know that. And the Guli Akim, equalized is a language from Eitz Chaim. Yeah. That's the picture in Eitz Chaim. We have it goes like this. So yes, he said it's yesh leimer. Remember, it's two reasons why he's explaining 2 reasons why everything is equal in Ak. Okay. Look, an avodah this means is there's no more amunah in a big tzaddik than there is in a ish poshet. The amunah he's talking about before, amunah pshuta. We're not talking about the levels of amunah and primius amunah and deep appreciation of amunah. The Mesiras Nefesh that he speaks in Tanya, Kal Sheva Kalin, is equal in everyone. That's what it is in Aveda. This. One second. Let's continue. Okay, so it's also that way before they emerge. It's like in Bereshis Bara Lakim. It's exactly like the seed. In a seed of a tree, leaves, the bark, the even the fruits, the branches. The seed is a seed. The seed is a seed, equally giving equal power to all of them. And he's giving an example, like when the revelation of the essential faculties. He gave an example earlier by a simcha, when a person's faculties are just all glowing and shining without any order, everything.
Yeah,
But think about it like I'm not going to speak like a. He says simcha, yem simcha, yeah, big simcha. Chapter 3, 22. He refers to it here. So, for example, so generally speaking, when you speak to a person in a rational day, in a sober day, you have, the mind has its way, it's functioning, the emotions, you don't express everything. Simcha, peres gad, you let everything loose. And suddenly, a person that's a brilliant person will give giluyim from his mind, he would say things that he would never say, new revelations. His heart and his emotions will be open to everybody. The Seder v'hadraga, the general structure of, let's call, day-to-day life and routine is not there. That's what he says earlier in chapter 2. He's giving an example of Shava. Even though these faculties are fundamentally different, the mind, the emotions, they're different. You also see it even physically. A person dances without limits. There's no, you walk in an organized way here. There's a certain areis from the kelim type of thing. You're out of the kelim. Like you said, learned earlier, chapter 22. He's giving an example. There, we're not even talking about how they're encompassed in the etzem. They're already being expressed. There's also an equality to them. So he says, and how much more so, the way they're encompassed in the source, the same thing, the worlds and the spheres, the way they're encompassed in Ak, there, the energy radiates in all of them equally. Vihine, this is still reason 1. We didn't get the base. Another parenthesis. Vihine, now, now he's saying, he's adding something. Now, after they come into being, atzilus radiates a little of this energy, of this all-encompassing energy. And asiyah doesn't radiate. Like the desire in the mind. So Ratzon is an equalizer. But the mind has more relationship with it because the Ratzon informs the mind, this is what I want. Whereas, for example, the legs are just a product of the desire, of the Ratzon. Like it says elsewhere, and we'll explain later with God's help. He's qualifying and saying this is primarily a specific desire. So this thought, in other words, let's think about the structure of the building. The general desire for the whole building is equal to the whole thing. But when you talk about the specific, saying I want to build a kitchen, it speaks more to the mind than it does to the hands. Because the mind is the part of the planning. So the Ratzon Prati has more of a relationship to Moyach, a little more than it will have to the action-oriented faculties. He's just qualifying it. We could say this is the Yesha, this is the Pnimius within Ak. This is not the... Right. Right. Okay. So what he just qualified was simply saying that even though the makif of Ak is the Ratzon, everything is unequal there. There is a place which you can say is like more the Pnimius, it's like the Pnimius within the makif, so to speak. Within the makif, there's a Pnimius where he's already associating, where the desire becomes more connected to implementation. Let's put it this way. It's more like Chachenius Haratzon, if you want to. There is distinction, but there's a place where there's a total equalization. That's reason number one why everything is equal in Nak. Now, reason number two, Rabbi's. Remember, these are two reasons. It goes back all the way to the second reason, second element. Because in the primordial thought of Ak, all the levels are completely concealed. Because they're not in existence there. Remember, in the seed, they're not in existence. In order, and aliyah is for them to be b'schalkus hamadregas, for them to have distinction and diversity. Because they're all encompassed literally in this thought. Without any distinct substance at all. Actually, this is better. The seed example is better for reason number two. Reason number one, it's almost the opposite. It's like the intensity of the machshava that just gives intensity and equal energy to every faculty. Right. Here it's like almost the opposite. That their distinctions are not there. He may have said similar things before.
But in the person.
Yeah?
There's two things.
I think you're right. I also think. And the Ayin, look into what it says in Samach Vav. How in Ak, all the levels are completely mufshat, are completely undressed, completely stripped of any parameters, of any kagdara, and any categorization, definition, identity. Maybe that's where it says it. I think that's the Sfiras Hagnuzis. I think that's where he said it. Yeah. It's like we learned earlier, chapter 19, Be'eses Sfiras Hagnuzis, Kivanta L'Dazendela. The 10 hidden spheres. Listen, if you remember what he learned, he definitely remembered what he wrote. In the 10 hidden spheres, like we learned earlier in the 10 hidden spheres in the infinite light that pre-tzimtzum, Kamoi came by Sfiras Ha'elamis. Kamoi came by Sfiras Ha'elamis. Kamoi Sheklolim Ba'ak. So it's comparing the same thing as they're encompassed in Ak. They're also like that. They're all basically beyond structure. Yeah. Now we connect the two reasons in the parentheses, and because they have no distinct identities, that's why they can all receive the air equally. Okay, and that's why, in order for there to be the actual bringing into being of the worlds, and worlds that are distinguished from one another, you need to have an individual, distinct desire for each particular world. And the example in this, The example is a person who builds any type of structure. First there's a desire in the structure altogether, general structure. And even though within this desire, already you find within it how this house structure should be b'tzir hachadorim, in the shape of their rooms, v'aliyas and the floors, and v'apsachim and the doors, v'chalenis and the windows, v'chein ba'etzim ba'avonim ba'ofer, and also in the wood and the stones and the earth, the dirt, the earth. So Eliezer, you have homework to do. What are all these levels spiritually? Rooms, floors, doors, and windows. Eitzim, wood, tree, stone, and offer, earth. Yeah. Mekol mokem, so even though it's all there encompassed in the general desire, but there it's not distinguishable, distinct in any, yet distinct in an individual desire. That's a desire for the entire house. So it encompasses everything. And afterwards, when it comes into action, when it's actualized, concretized, there's a distinct desire, an individual desire for every room, valiyah, and every floor, and for every specific element of this structure. Same thing, the example above for the bechinas machshava agduma, the primordial thought. This is the thought and the desire for the general world. Shekulam sham behelam adayin. They're all concealed there. They're still concealed. And afterwards, nimshach ratzon prati l'chol elam b'frat. And afterwards, a individual, distinct desire manifests and extends to each distinct world.
How can we say that shekulam sham behelam adayin when the Rebbe just says earlier that there's, although Hayosh Baratzon Zek far nimsa echia, already has his ingredients, he knows what materials he needs to build the house. He knows that he needs the kitchen marble and he needs this.
No, maybe not. You're adding something. He knows that he wants.
That he needs all the materials that's already there. They existed, that his need for.
No, but he doesn't. But he has not given thought of whether it's marble or not marble.
No, yeah.
No. So once I think about it. A person envisions in one big picture, I want a palace. Obviously, you're right there. You're thinking of the rooms, but if someone stopped right there, I told you before, and didn't call in any contractor and didn't talk, you'd have no building from that. You could even have every detail would be there, but there's another step where you need to sit down and plan each room in detail. And that needs more specific desire for each one. There are two stages. Two stages. But remember, he wants an existence to be that we make sense to us. So he doesn't need a thought altogether. That's the case. He doesn't even need thought. Who cares the time? It's not about time. It's about levels. There are two levels here at least, if not more. Right. But that's the same question you can ask about atzilus, beriyah, and asiyah. There's a vision. The vision has it all. Then you make an outline. When you make an outline, let's say you're perfect. You have it all in your mind. I understand sometimes we make the outline, new things emerge. But let's say, you make them. Then the outline is fleshed out, and then it's concluded. It may happen quickly, but it's stages. That's all that we're saying here.
Didn't you say earlier that Ak is already the histakel beriyah alma? That the Ak is the level of Torah already, the blueprint.
Okay.
So
one second. And that blueprint, as I said, includes all time and space, from the end of time and space. Yet, we have 6 days of creation, and we're still here, 5,000 Ayin Beis Shana. The Torah recognizes each day, according to what you're saying, what's the difference between Shabbos and weekday? In Torah, it's no difference. It's all part of the blueprint. In reality, today is Thursday, not Wednesday.
In Torah, there's a distinction between.
Right? Did you hear what I just said to you?
No, I didn't understand the point.
In the blueprint, there's no difference between Shabbos and Sunday and Monday. It's all one blueprint that just talks about. But then it plays itself out. Each day has its own.
You say the Torah is a blueprint. Within Torah, there's already the distinction of Shabbos and Chol.
So why are we living? Is every day relevant to the Torah? Today, can you do that? Can you do the mitzvahs of yesterday?
No.
Why? Because in the blueprint level, it's all above time and space. It encompasses all time and space. What are you saying? There's gradations all the time.
But what I'm just trying to ask is that we said that, and you said earlier that Ak is already at the level of the...
And encompasses all time and space, all in one seed.
So it's not truly a form blueprint. It's just a general blueprint.
No, every detail is there. Every detail is there, but it's a blueprint. You can't do anything with a blueprint. You don't have existence without a blueprint. The blueprint shapes existence.
So then
God looks in the Torah and says, now there's day 2. Comes day 2. Why doesn't he do it all in day 1? One second. I'm asking you a question. The blueprint, everything is there.
Right.
So why does God need 6 days?
To implement it. The blueprint.
So there's a difference between implementation.
The difference between blueprint and building it.
That's exactly what he's saying. And there's a desire in the whole picture is the general thing, which has all the details in it. And then there's the desire. On day 1, here's how we're going to do light. On day 2, here's how we're going to do rakia. Day 3, and I could go even further. The details, you probably have even more ritzainus. I don't understand what you were saying. This is a structure with a...
The first level...
You don't understand that there's a difference where everything is in a blueprint, in a seed, and then it comes out actual, and when it comes out you also need a plan? You think it's just an automatic thing? Matan Torah happened 26 generations after creation. Did God desire that it should happen that day, or just like popped out of nowhere it happened?
Of course it is.
So there's a Ratzon Prati on that day that today will be Matan Torah. Even though the Torah says it all in the beginning. Because in a blueprint, it's like all time and space is seen in a snapshot.
Blueprint by definition
is not a building, exactly.
Right, it's not a building, but it implies details.
All the details above time and space. I just asked you a question. When God decided to take the Jews out of Mitzrayim, was there a Ratzon that morning that God? Yes or not? Yes, there was a Ratzon. Even though it was all there in a general sense of it. I mean, I don't understand what you're asking, really. I understand it both on a human level and a divine level. What's the question? I don't get it.
Here is it seems to be
a blueprint is a blueprint. It's not a structure. You need atzilus now. We need a real atzilus. Now you need a desire for atzilus. Why don't you just read the words? It's very, very clear.
But you're saying that everything is shabbat in God, right?
It's a seed level.
Isn't that exact level?
It's a seed.
The seed level goes to all protein, but they're not.
I don't know.
Detectable.
And I'm going to stop here because I have to do something. So let's finish here.
Isn't that what he's saying?
Chapter.
What are the 2 reasons why is it not detectable?
Not detectable. One is why it's an equalizer. One is because on the oyer and ak is equal in every level.
But you can detect it. You can detect the porch from the kitchen.
No, I don't think you can detect it either way. You can't.
Atzilus you can detect.
No, in ak, the 2 reasons why ak is an equalizer. One is because the energy everywhere is equal, and the other is because the identity of the items are all concealed there.
Concealed because of what?
Yes.
The distinction is concealed.
Because then you can't.
Yeah, there's no substance in it. Exactly. When you look at a blueprint, you don't see a kitchen. You only know there's an image of a kitchen. Exactly correct.
Not even an image.
Right. On the blueprint, it's all lines. It's all lines.
You can't.
A plan. It's a plan. That's all it is.
Okay, that's not a blueprint. You're the construction guy. If you look at a blueprint and you couldn't see the distinction between the kitchen and the lines,
You don't see the marble. You don't see the marble counter. The wood
You
counter
can
in
see
the
in the
blueprint.
seed, he sees already the marble and the stuff.
You don't see
so
the-
there's an graceful contraction.
You don't see the marble.
I'm not going to the details of the
No.
marble, but you know that one room is a kitchen and one is a living room.
But they all look the same on the blueprint.
Right,
They
right.
don't. They look
Yeah,
the
it
same.
doesn't-
It's dots.
You don't know when you look at a
Dots.
blueprint.
No,
you don't
you
know
don't
that
see
one
it.
is
It
a
takes you
kitchen.
time to
This is what I'm struggling with.
You know that you want to make a kitchen there, but it look on the thing on the blueprint it all looks the same.
No.
That's
Have
what
you looked at
know.
blueprints?
Yeah, the big ones that
Come
go
on. The ones listed, one is designated.
I'm not gonna do that.
One is a living room, and one is a dining room, and one is a
No,
basement.
but
Tomorrow.
in essence, they're all lines.
Okay, we did chapter. Let's stop it. Chapter 63, page 117, 118.
See, is the architect labels this is the kitchen. and
Whatever.
this is the dining